Good afternoon, everyone. Plutôt bonjour à toutes, bonjour à tous. Aujourd'hui, cet après-midi, en tout cas, j'ai décidé de mixer un petit peu le français et l'anglais, parce qu'on parle un petit peu trop anglais à Paris. En tout cas, à mon goût, je suis désolé. Donc, je vais passer de l'anglais au français, ou du français à l'anglais. Le sujet d'aujourd'hui est un sujet, finalement, totalement d'actualité, en dehors de l'actualité de la COP27. Et la question qu'on peut d'abord se poser, c'est est-ce qu'il y a aujourd'hui un changement de paradigme en 2022? Est-ce que cette COP27 peut répondre à de nouveaux enjeux? On vient de vivre un cycle de changement ces dernières années, ces dernières décennies qui est absolument exceptionnel, avec la signature des accords de Paris qui a abouti à des objectifs plus ambitieux, même si on sait déjà que les 1,5 degrés seront dépassés dès 2030. 2030, c'est demain. Et puis, le changement climatique, évidemment, est l'objet de toutes les attentions et la transition énergétique s'est imposée dans les politiques publiques de la grande majorité des États du monde. Donc tout ça, tout le monde le sait. Il y a peu de temps encore, il existait un consensus pour dire que finalement, on allait de manière unilatérale, de manière radicale, suivre une trajectoire d'amélioration, d'efficacité du mix énergétique avec une vitesse plus ou moins différente d'un pays à un autre, mais quasi exclusivement avec des énergies renouvelables. Et puis une première brèche est apparue, quand même, il faut en parler, la transition écologique allemande qui a stoppé le nucléaire, ce qui a coûté très cher, ce qui a permis, certes, une augmentation de l'éolien et du solaire, par exemple, de manière substantielle, mais en accompagnant avec beaucoup de gaz et beaucoup de charbon. Alors, on peut se poser une question, peut-on augmenter les énergies renouvelables sans paradoxalement polluer par nécessité ? La transition peut-elle se faire de manière aussi radicale que certains le proclament? Et en 2021, nouvelle question, le nucléaire revient sur le devant de la scène avec un consensus maintenant et une meilleure acceptabilité, notamment en France, de cette source d'énergie dans la transition énergétique. Il y a encore un an, je vous rappelle que nous avions beaucoup de débats en France sur le fait qu'on devait sortir du nucléaire. Il y a seulement un an. Et en 2022, encore une nouvelle brèche avec cette fois-ci, sur le devant de la scène, le gaz, puisque le gaz, comme vous le savez, risque d'être coupé, ou en tout cas très largement rationalisé, avec un manque d'abondance de gaz très probable. Donc est-ce que cette source d'énergie, qui finalement pouvait contribuer à une transition douce, on va pouvoir trouver des moyens de substituer une nouvelle source d'énergie? On ne sait pas. Nouvelle question. Et puis, évidemment, on ne peut pas parler de la COP27 sans aussi parler du coût de la transition énergétique, puisqu'on se rend compte maintenant qu'il y a un problème d'acceptabilité de la source d'énergie dans un contexte inflationniste, avec des coûts pour les citoyens qui sont de plus en plus élevés. Enfin, comme j'ai toujours été passionné à la fois de l'Europe et de l'Afrique, je ne peux pas ne pas souligner qu'évidemment cette COP sera pour la première fois en Afrique, je crois, que la question se pose de savoir si on peut accepter que l'Afrique continue d'exploiter ses ressources de pétrole et de gaz dans un contexte de transition énergétique et de baisse des ressources conventionnelles du fait de la guerre actuelle. Les ressources conventionnelles dont dispose l'Afrique, est-ce qu'on peut priver l'Afrique de les exploiter? Est-ce qu'on peut la laisser en marge de la possibilité d'accéder à l'énergie et de se développer grâce à ces sources? C'est une vraie question. En tout cas, la présidence égyptienne, on aura l'occasion au cours de l'une de nos sessions avec l'une de nos speakers d'en parler, a clairement dit qu'elle voulait que cette conférence soit une conférence africaine, donc sans doute dédiée aux pays du Sud. Alors après une COP26 assez décevante, je crois, la COP27 pourra avoir pour objectif peut-être de réduire la demande d'énergie, de sortir des énergies fossiles différemment, d'augmenter les financements pour le Sud, on en a parlé, et puis peut-être de se concentrer sur les moyens de capter le CO2. On fait face donc, avec cette COP27 en novembre, à de nombreux défis et de nouveaux enjeux dans un contexte qui a complètement changé en quelques mois. Et nos panélistes, auprès desquels je m'excuse d'avoir été aussi long pour cette introduction, vont essayer d'y répondre. Je voudrais les présenter un par un néanmoins, ce qui permettra de souligner qu'ils sont tous avec nous également. Donc je voudrais tout d'abord présenter Nevine Mansour, who is advisor to the Vice Minister of Finance, Capital Markets in Egypt, with the Ministry of Finance of Egypt. Thank you, Nevine. We've got Christophe DOSSARPS, who is CEO of Sustainable Infrastructure Foundation. Merci, Christophe. Eric MEYER, Managing Director, France for RBC Capital Markets. Thomas RAJZBAUM, Managing Director for EQT Group. And Nick WOOLFITT, who is Head of Specialized Finance Europe at National Australia Bank Limited. Merci. So, without being too long in introductions, I would like to hand over directly to Nevine. Nevine, as you know, is with the Ministry of Finance in Egypt, and we wanted to have the feedback of public authorities regarding how, as Egypt is welcoming the COP27, what are the likely areas of focus of this upcoming event, in particular regarding energy transition, because this is our subject today. So, Nevine, the screen is yours.
Yes. Hi, Boris. Hi, everyone, and hi, panelists. I really wish to be with you in physical appearance today, but I'm sure next time maybe we'll have the chance to meet you all in person. So thank you so much for inviting me to this panel, and I'm sure that today we are discussing a very important and pressing topic, and I'll be very happy to listen to the panelists to have a fruitful discussion. So yes, regarding to the COP27 and the preparations of Egypt for that very important and big event. We will be starting our COP this year in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh. It will be starting on the 6th of November till the 18th of November. We are ready. Egypt is ready. Everyone on the ground is working very hard to accommodate and to welcome all the delegates from around the world to come together in one venue and discuss this very pressing matter worldwide. So we thought that COP27 should be a continuation of course, the previous COPs, and specifically the COP26. However, being held in Egypt, we are wearing the hat of Africa and speaking on behalf of Africa. And in this matter, we already held a meeting with the ministers of finance, environment, and economics and development from across Africa during the beginning of September. We had a conference and bilateral meetings and one generic meeting with all these finance ministers and, like I said, environment ministers and economic ministers, whereby we discussed the pressing matters and the challenges that are facing Africa from related to, of course, to all the climate change financial products, and how can we finance actually the way forward and the transition, including, of course, the energy, which is our topic today. So we came up with a communiqué that we will be presenting during the COP27 that is taking place in November to express and to have like an agenda to express the voice of Africa. What do we need? What are our challenges? How can we ask for the help and the support from the financial markets and from other developed countries to help Africa in order to be aligned with the global agenda. Having said that, for us, it is very important during the COP27 to find implementable solutions. That's why our slogan for the COP27 is from pledges to implementation. It's very important, of course, that the COPs before held many discussions and talked about the concepts and raising awareness about different topics here and there. But we think that bringing it to being implementable is the main purpose of the COP27 that is being held in Egypt in less than 2 months' time. I'll stop here, and then we can then share maybe more details.
Thanks, Nevine. Just one last quick question, maybe. Do you see a translation into actions at your country's level and as a representative of public sector of the Paris Agreement? Did you have an idea of translation into actions of things since the Paris Agreement in 2015?
Of course, we took that into consideration, and that's why we want more practical solutions that could be implemented on the ground, so that Africa could blend into the action that the world is taking in that matter.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Nevine. I'm going to switch to Thomas. And Thomas, on your side, are there any things that you consider being delivered since the Paris Agreement?
Hi, everyone. I think the honest answer is not much, and that's unfortunately consistent actually through the COP. I mean, if you think about what the COP is about, is to reduce carbon emissions, and since the COP started, emissions have increased by 2% per annum very consistently. So I don't think, at least in terms of the key objectives of the Paris Agreement, much has been delivered yet. I think it's fair to say that though it has raised awareness a lot, as the GIEC has also, and I think since the Paris Agreement, I think people start to understand, the government, the private sector start to understand that change needs to happen. I think it's fair to say also that the climate is helping us with everything that we have seen in the last years. All the climate crisis raises awareness for everyone. So I really like actually what has been said just before. I mean, now it's time to get to implementation, and but it's true also that a COP per se is just a government discussing. In the end, you need to really embrace all these changes. These changes are difficult, and you need to have governments and private companies ready to make significant effort to tackle this change.
And so in this respect, how do you see the role of the private sector in the future to implement?
Well, I think it's fundamental. I think the shareholders have a significant role to play, because as long as you're only focused on finance, I mean, the rational thing to do is not to save the climate, right? So you need to beyond. I mean, and I'm speaking as a private investor in the private equity world. So I mean, hearing it from us is also quite interesting. But I think there's a real awareness that it cannot be only financial performance, and that you need to take into account the impact that you have on society when you're making investments. And I think at EQT, it's interesting to see what has been done in the last year, because we're the first private firm that has validated its greenhouse emission targets through the Science-Based Target Initiative. So it's a very scientific way of actually measuring our carbon footprint and having objectives to reduce them in the short term in compliance with the Paris Agreement. And maybe this ties back to your initial question of, did it have an impact? I mean, I'm pretty sure not much to date, but hopefully it will in the future. Longer term. And what it means, just to finish on this, I mean, is that us as investment professionals of EQT, we need to deliver these targets, but also all our portfolio companies. And now it's getting more interesting, right? Because we're managing like 100 billion euros of assets, and we're imposing to all our portfolio companies to go through the same quite painful science-based target initiatives, where they have to do their scope 1, 2, 3 emissions targets, and then come to us with very specific plans of reducing it in the next 3 to 4 years. So hopefully now we'll move to the implementation phase, which is probably long overdue.
Thanks, Thomas. And Eric, if we talk about Canada, which is a country that you know, and what are Canada and Royal Bank of Canada doing for climate change? What is your role? Can you explain how all this can be implemented, maybe?
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, well, Canada is a bit of a special place because it's a very significant producer of fossil fuels. The Canadian government has called for more oil and gas production to help erase the global crisis in a short run, but while maintaining a firm commitment to competitive and decarbonized oil and gas in the long run. And that's a big of a challenge. And those goals are both, they're within reach, but at a very significant cost. I mean, 2050 net zero targets can still be reached, but policy action over the next 24 months will be critical to chart a climate and energy path to net zero in 2050. So, as I was saying, energy is a critical sector for Canada. Oil and gas extraction and related activities could account to close to 10% of Canadian GDP in 2022 and spoke for close to 600,000 jobs, indirect and direct, in 2020. So given its sizable resources, Canada can play a critical role in ensuring global energy security by boosting its oil and gas exports to the US without threatening its climate goals. Oil sands and conventional producers can raise production by up to 500,000 barrels a day. So sorry to talk about increasing production of oil when we're all discussing about how reducing it. But this basically is a very necessary, and that ties in with what you were saying about the fact that we have to combine, short-term emergencies and effectuate this transition, and it's a transition more than anything else. So, I mean, this 500,000 barrels would add probably 9 million tons of greenhouse gases per year. So that's a very significant cost of about $1.5 billion annually to abate, but it has its own benefits for the moment. But most importantly, I mean, this additional barrel, Canadian barrel, can displace those of other producers, though it will be with no additional global emission. Meeting climate targets, despite new production, will demand significant investments in methane reduction, as well as electrification and carbon capture across industries. Cutting emissions 40% from current levels in oil sands by 2030 will likely require $45 to $65 billion in capital spending between 2024 and 2030, peaking at about $9 billion per year mid-decade. That's a lot of money. Full upstream decarbonization with carbon capture, CCUS, will require oil price averaging roughly $50 WTI through 2050. Not obvious. So a deliberate approach to deploying decarbonization technology in the oil sand is absolutely necessary, and in the same time, just make sure that we can address all technology changes and all solutions. CCUS should therefore be viewed as a very important, but not the only measure to be taken. That's for Canada. What about RBC? I mean, RBC knows addressing climate change is the biggest and the most challenging undertaking of our lifetime. There are no simple solutions, no quick fixes. It is about turning a dial in the right direction, not flipping a switch. As Canada's largest company and as a leading global financial services firm, we're ready for that challenge and to do our part. We have a plan, the Cbc Climate Blueprint, that lays out how we can accelerate the pace of change in 4 key ways. First, work with our clients to understand and support their transition plans and facilitate $500 billion in sustainable financing. Second, achieve net zero emission in our lending in 2050 with interim targets aligned with our client plans and with the Net Zero Banking Alliance commitments, with transparent measurement and reporting. Third, inform and inspire a sustainable future through producing research on climate issues and policies, and convince stakeholders to effect meaningful actions and incentives to progress across sectors. And lastly, we need to play our part, so advancing net zero leadership in our own operations, including reducing greenhouse gas emission by 70% by 2025, and increasing our sourcing of renewable and non-emitting electricity sources by 100% by 2025. So effectively, Addressing climate change requires creativity, passions, and resolve, three key attributes of Cbc's success. So that's why we feel we were positioned to accompany this change.
And in your view, how to address what can be called the energy trilemma, which is secure, reliable supply at an affordable cost with minimizing at the same time the environmental impact? Are there any lessons to learn from experience of your clients and your activity?
No, it's a very fair point, and I won't use our clients, but you know, the energy trilemma is nothing new. But balancing those three goals that you mentioned of ensuring a secure and reliable energy supply at an affordable cost and with minimum environmental impact has become a daunting challenge. And in times of pressing need to implement effectively those COP26 and the goals for climate ambition, but as well with energy and commodity prices surging following Russia's aggression of Ukraine. I'll base myself on an example. The Boston Consulting Group has identified 8 realities that are shaping the contours of our energy future, and it's worth reminding them. First of all, the power of policymaking. Policymakers will continue to rewrite the rules of the game over the next 18 months, and the effect of these policies will be enduring for decades. So better be right, and that's truly important. Second, new energy security challenges. If the global dependence on hydrocarbons will likely decline over time, new dependencies on critical minerals and technologies will arise, creating new points of vulnerability and geopolitical challenges. Third, a shortage of energy efficiency measures. Enforcing consumption reduction measures is politically delicate, as we all know. And many countries, by adopting instead subsidies or tax reduction, in fact boost demand at the margins and potentially create market shortfalls. Scarcity or perceived scarcity may lead to hoarding, exacerbating scarcity even more. So fourth, higher decarbonization cost. Trade-off between affordability and decarbonization becomes tougher as events such as a war in Ukraine disrupt cost curves in both directions and across commodity types, making decision-making very difficult and highly sensitive. There's another effect as well, which is greenflation. New significant power and gas infrastructure investments are required to reorient European supply networks away from Russia and towards LNG imports. It leads to additional supply chain logjams and future cost inflation for critical minerals essential to renewable technologies. I'm almost finished. Greater energy price volatility as well. The volatility leads to oil and gas companies delaying investment decisions and access to financing being constrained by increased sensitivities to interest rates and uncertainty over proof of offtakes or floor prices. Insufficient energy supply as well. I think low historical investment in global energy supply, coupled with insufficient funding of new technologies, make the world still far short of the $3 to $4 trillion needed annually to fund the energy transition. We're far from there. And lastly, inadequate energy access to in the developing world. I think inconsistent messaging to developing countries already penalized by lack of energy supply fuels anger and disincentivize the necessary and agreed to $100 billion annual investment for reducing the impact of climate in the developing world. So what does this all mean? It means on 3 consistencies that I referred to. First one, businesses. Businesses must build operational resilience and be responsive and nimble in front of uncertainty, short-term shocks, and changing regulation. Policymakers will have to adopt a proactive stance with more government intervention, not less, to provide the frameworks and incentives necessary for energy markets to adapt. And lastly, developing economies, the most affected by climate change and higher costs for food and fuel, we'll have to navigate between focusing on the near term during times of crisis and manage energy transitions, no small feat.
Thank you very much. If we now change continent, we'll go to Australia, and thanks, Nick, for joining us. We know that Australia is among the largest carbon producers per capita, and maybe you could tell us what is done in Australia and how your bank acts in this respect, because there may be lessons to learn also.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Boris. I think maybe to start, Australia has both a blessing and a curse. Australia is rich in every sort of energy there is. I think Australia is the second largest exporter of coal in the world. We've got a lot of gas, not much oil, but there is some oil. There's two of the world's great hydroelectric schemes. It's sunny, it's windy, there's uranium, there's lithium. So Australia's in a very interesting position of having been able to monetize a lot of the energy in the ground, typically by putting it onto boats and sending it around the world, especially to Asia, as that continent has grown. At the same time, Australia's got a significant curse in that when climate change hits, it hits Australia hard. We've seen dreadful bushfires in and around New South Wales. We've seen floods in Queensland and New South Wales as well, and in the part of the country where I grew up, rainfall's dropped by about a quarter over the last 20 years. So it's complex, and there's livelihoods that have been built upon the mining industry, mining coal, producing oil and gas. But interestingly, and I think the Australian population in a recent election probably agreed with the French that the previous Australian government wasn't much good. So the new government has actually committed to legislation around carbon reduction. So we now have in law 100%, so net zero by 2050, 43% by 2030. So it's actually not that far off Europe. Europe's at 50 and 100 over that time. So that transition, that change at a political level is starting to happen. We're seeing a government that has been elected with climate change being the main issue, which is when you think about inflation, pandemic, cost of living, etc., shows how important the Australian population finds climate change and how deeply it's felt. On top of that, I think, and it's a little bit interesting in France, which is obviously a very centralised place, Australia is a federal structure. So while at the Commonwealth level there's been a degree of slow movement around transitioning to net zero, the states and indeed corporates have actually moved a lot sooner. So some of the states, Victoria, for example, is well on track to be above 50% from sustainable sources by 2030. I think they're not far off that level already. As a bank as well, we're moving in a similar direction. So we've made certain commitments around science-based targets, as others have around net zero banking alliance, as others have, and also we're pushing product innovation. We're involved in green loans, green bonds, green derivatives, green FX, and interest rate derivatives. So it's something that we feel very strongly about as being not only the right thing to do, but right commercial sense. You know, we want to work with our customers, people like Thomas, where with one of his portfolio companies, where we're financing the electrification of a ferry fleet. It's important to our customers, so it's important to us as well.
And if we talk about decarbonizing electricity generation, are there any examples of development of renewable energy in the agriculture, mining, or other sectors that?
Yeah, sure. And I think one of my pet peeves, this is going to come out the wrong way. I am absolutely in favour of renewable electricity generation. It's great. We've done over 150 wind and solar projects. But decarbonisation is wider than electricity generation. You need the grid infrastructure to go with it. Things like metering, you need to decarbonise heat, you need to decarbonise transport, you need to decarbonise industry, you need to decarbonise agriculture as well. Wind farms are great, but they're easy. We can all build wind farms. We've been doing that in Europe, in Australia, in North America for 20 years. Decarbonising flights, that's hard. sustainable aviation fuel, and building the infrastructure to support it. There's a lot of talk about hydrogen. It's a lot of talk. Let's sort of see it build, and the ecosystem around that as well. The need to transport it, to handle it, to ship it. Those are all quite important pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. So as a bank, certainly here in Europe, and we like Europe because things happen first in Europe, they happen later in Australia and in North America. But in Europe, the role of, we play a large role in funding sustainable heat. I mean, here in Paris, a couple of our customers produce heat through geothermal energy. It's not gas, it's not coal, it's great. So I think that, and things like metering and demand management, and as we get on EV charging and batteries, are all important. So don't get me wrong, absolutely love renewable energy, renewable electricity generation, but it's much wider than that. It is much wider than that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to now hand over to Christophe. And Christophe, you may have a different view or different approach to some of our panelists today. And I would like to know, in your view, how can the MDBs through source help with the energy transition agenda, in particular in this framework of the COP27?
Yeah, thank you. I think by listening to panelists, it's good to see that solutions exist. And then the question is, why is it not happening at the pace that we would like to? One of the issues, if we look at it in infrastructure, there is no standard today. If we want to take off a plane from an airport, there is a checklist that has to go through, and this is why the airport industry has been developing so fast in the past few years. And this is something that we need to find in infrastructure. So that's why, for example, the Fast Infra Sustainable Infrastructure label is important, or the EU taxonomy, the PIDA quality label. So different methodologies that will make the projects well prepared. What SOURCE does is basically a public good funded by the MDBs, and we are implementing that at no cost in governments so they can have well-prepared projects. Now, standardization should be there in order to scale. And if we don't have the scale that we need, we will not be able to have this energy transition. Yes, we need patience, but I don't think we have time. So we need to make sure that there is something that is changing business as usual so that we can find ways to accompany governments, because at the end of the day, it's in their hands when they come up with development plans, infrastructure projects, priorities, and also to develop the different policies that have to be implemented in order to have, to provide certainty to investors. And I think this is what we have been trying to do when we come about the platform sourced from the MDBs. We have success stories in Uzbekistan and Ecuador. The platform is being institutionalized by law in order to have projects well prepared. What is a well prepared project? It's going to be communication. Communication between different ministries and agencies. We see that in many countries that Ministry of Planning, Budget, Finance, Transport, they do not share necessarily the information consistently. But also, what is the common language that we can have with the private sector? And then what type of methodologies can be used and digitalized so that the public sector can see how they are performing against different methodologies. There are different methodologies that are coming now, the Blue Dot Network, Global Gateway, MCDF at AIIB, and the EU taxonomy, but also the Fast Infra Sustainable label. There are different methodologies that exist. So what is important is at the end of the day is that the governments can have a way to access different global best practices, speak the same language as the private sector, to share information and communicate efficiently. If we don't get to that, we will not address the main problem that we see and that we have seen in the past few years is project preparation. I mean, have we ever seen a project that is well prepared, financeable and bankable not to be financed? No, that's the problem, is that there are many project preparation facilities out there. Millions, if not billions of dollars are spent, but it's not enough in order to have the pipelines of countries to be met. Because if you look at the pipelines of countries, they're going to have hundreds, if not thousands of projects. So they need to have an online guidance or something in order to be helping them to make sure that the projects are well prepared. and also to support their digitalization agenda. They are trying to digitalize, e-procurement platforms are being created. We need to emphasize on that because if you can collect information, if you can collect data, it can be measured. If it's measurable, then we can have change. We are not there yet. This is what I think is important in order to look at what exists, what we are doing individually, but at the end of the day is how can we support governments in order to get those projects well prepared, support their digitalization agenda. And the discussion this morning with the ambassador from India was about data, information, the Gati Shakti plan. It's a very important plan, but we need to see more of that. We need to see more digitalization because then the governments will be able to have that support on the long term. Turnover in governments are very high. Sometimes they get trained, they get a certification, and then they go to the private sector. So the expertise has to stay. So if they leave, how do we find the information? How do we retrieve that project? Where does it stand? Where does it, what is the block? How can we overcome the different blockages? So this is what we have been doing, and this is what we are doing in 20 countries now with the platform source that is free and it's a public good. But it's, of course, it's not enough. We need 200 countries.
Sorry to interrupt, Christophe, but one important question is, do you have feedback from those 20 countries that are now included? And can you tell us about this feedback from the countries?
Yeah, I can give you some.
Or concrete examples that have resulted in access to knowledge. And
yes, absolutely. So Uzbekistan, the feedback from the project officers, so as a private sector, you're going to see the projects that are being tendered, but before that, you had project officers from the Ministry of Transport to enter the data into a platform, if they have one. And in Uzbekistan, we have institutionalized the platform by law so that they use it consistently, and they use it on a daily basis. And all the projects of Uzbekistan are going to that. The reason why they like the platform is that it gives them access to international best practices, and it gives them an online guidance to make sure that they can follow a certain process that we developed with the private sector. So CDPQ, Caisse de déploiement du Québec, White & Case, Macquarie. So there are many different entities that have helped to prepare those different questions to make sure that the projects are well prepared. Ecuador, the reason they wanted to use it is because they have pipelines of PPPs, and they need to have a way to show the seriousness of project preparation. South Africa, they have a 5-case model. Maybe you've heard about it. They wanted to have that digitalized so they can follow their process online. In Région Hauts-de-France, they are now piloting Source because they want to have the local public authorities to have an online guidance to prepare their projects. The feedback are coming more and more, and the EBRD a few years ago, they put a project on Source, and the project had a financial close. It doesn't mean it's because of Source, but if you have more transparency, consistency, standardization, of course, you're going to get more interest and more well-prepared project, which is basically what is lacking. There are tons of pipelines, but pipelines of well-prepared projects, we need to build them.
Thank you very much. I see that you've all been very disciplined with time, so thank you very much. I just would like to check if there are any questions from the room to our panelists today on the various topics that we've raised. No questions. Well, then, thanks everyone. Thanks very much.